All right, let's jump right in today. We're taking a deep dive into Bangladeshi politics, looking at a recent piece from the Daily Star, a major newspaper over there,
Yeah.
and it's all about some changes happening in the interim government.
Definitely a lot going on there, and the article gives a pretty good snapshot of uh, how things are shifting. I mean, this government's still finding its feet, right?
Right, and it's a unique situation for sure. Like, we have to remember,
Yeah.
this interim government came to be after the Awami League was toppled. That was the previous government,
Yeah.
and they had been leading the country for a long time.
They had decades, really. So this shift in leadership, no surprise, it sent shockwaves through Bangladesh, and internationally, people are paying attention.
Absolutely, big deal. Now, from what I'm seeing in this article, the focus is really on the interim government's Council of Advisors.
Mm-hmm.
They just brought in 3 new members.
Yep, 3 new faces.
Okay. And each one, it seems like, comes from a pretty different background.
Very distinct, yeah.
So who are these new players? What can we learn about them? And what kind of impact might they have?
Okay, well, first up, we've got Mahfouz.
Yeah.
Now, his story, it's especially interesting, I think. Before he was appointed to the council, he was working as a special assistant to Professor Muhammad Yunus.
Oh, wow. Professor Yunus. That name definitely rings a bell.
Yeah, most people probably recognize him as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. I mean, he's done some groundbreaking work on microfinance and social business.
Yeah, definitely. That's a pretty significant connection. Now, I have to ask, what sort of influence do you think Professor Yunus's ideas might have on the interim government's policies, especially with alum now part of the mix?
It's definitely a point worth considering. Yunus has always been a big advocate for a more people-centric approach to development. He emphasizes things like poverty reduction, social entrepreneurship, and empowerment at the grassroots level.
Right.
So, yeah, it's possible we'll see some of those ideas reflected in what the government's doing.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, that would be a shift, right? Moving away from more traditional top-down policies and toward, like you said, more of a bottom-up approach.
It would be. And it makes you think, are they trying to create a more inclusive society, maybe a more equitable one?
It's a good question.
And there's another layer to Elam's background that makes things even more, intriguing, I guess you could say.
Cool.
He's a student at Dhaka University's law department, and he's been active in the anti-discrimination student movement.
Right. I remember reading about that. That movement was really key in the events that ultimately led to the change in government.
It was. So appointing him, it could be a strategic move, bringing in someone who represents that movement's voice.
Now, I do recall some controversy around Alum, specifically his role in the events that led up to the Awami League losing power.
Yeah, that's right. Some have labeled him the brains behind the whole uprising, although he's denied that.
He has.
But you can't deny the connection, right? He's connected to that student movement and the events that unfolded. So his appointment, it just adds another layer of complexity to the situation.
It's a bold move on the interim government's part, that's for sure. They don't seem to be shying away from bringing in figures who were connected to the forces that led to this change.
Exactly. And it's not just about optics, It's about having specific expertise, diverse perspectives.
Yeah, and that brings us to the second new advisor, Scoop Bashir Udin.
Right, Udin. Now, he comes from a completely different world, the world of business and industry.
All right, let's hear about that. What's his story? What kind of expertise is he bringing to the table?
So Udin is the managing director of the Akij Bashir Group. That's one of the biggest industrial conglomerates in Bangladesh. And his family, they've got deep roots in the business sector. His father, Sheikh Akish Udin, was a pretty prominent industrialist himself.
So basically, Bangladeshi business royalty.
You could say that.
Okay, so what does that mean for this interim government? Are they sending a signal that economic growth and stability are top priorities?
I think it's a strong possibility. Udin being appointed, it could suggest a shift towards policies that are friendly to businesses. The goal there might be to stimulate economic activity, attract investment, that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, what kind of economic policies they pursue. It does make you wonder, what are they really prioritizing here?
Right.
Is it all about boosting the economy? Or will we see some focus on social issues, environmental concerns, that kind of thing?
Yeah, balancing those different interests, I mean, that's going to be tough.
No doubt.
And, going back to something you said earlier, this idea of a dynamic approach.
Mm-hmm.
What does that even mean in this context?
Yeah, it's a good question. Dynamic, it could be a bit of a buzzword, right?
Good.
I mean, for some people, it might mean being flexible, able to adapt to whatever comes up. For others, maybe it means being bold, willing to really shake things up.
Right, right. And we also can't forget the international implications of all
No,
this. Bangladesh isn't making these decisions in a vacuum.
Nope, not at all. They're part of a bigger picture, a geopolitical landscape, and what they do is going to have ripple effects.
For sure. So if Uden, for example, pushes for closer ties with global corporations,
Right.
that could have a huge impact on, well, on so many things. Trade agreements, foreign investment, even labor
You
standards.
nailed it. It's all connected.
It's like these new appointments, they represent different paths that Bangladesh could take.
Yeah,
And this interim government, they're the ones who have to decide which direction to go in.
they are. And you're right. It's not as simple as just choosing one path over another. It's about navigating a whole web of possibilities, right?
Hey.
Each decision you have to weigh the potential benefits, the risks.
And this brings us to the third new advisor, Mustafa Sarwar Faruqi. Now, this one's particularly interesting to me. He's a filmmaker, and he's joining a council where most members are, well, they're politicians, they're business leaders.
Yeah, it's quite a contrast.
Huge contrast. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating choice, and it really does play into this idea of dynamism that we've been talking about. Bringing someone from the arts and culture world, it suggests they're thinking outside the traditional box when it comes to how to govern.
Okay, so what kind of voice do you think he'll bring to this council? Will he push for more funding for the arts? Maybe advocate for greater freedom of expression? Or will he use his platform to promote Bangladeshi culture internationally?
Yeah, lots of possibilities there, all really intriguing. It could be a sign that they're recognizing the importance of soft power.
Oh, yeah, soft power. That's using culture to influence perceptions, build relationships, all of that.
Exactly. And it's something we've seen other countries use very effectively to kind of boost their global image, build those connections.
Makes you wonder if Bangladesh is thinking along those same lines.
Possibly.
Moving beyond traditional diplomacy and engaging with the world through art, through culture.
It's a strategy that could really pay off in the long term. Imagine if Bangladesh becomes known not just for, I don't know, economic progress, but for its arts scene, its literature, its cultural heritage.
That would be a pretty amazing transformation.
It would, going from being seen as, well, primarily a developing nation to, like you said, a cultural powerhouse, a place known for creativity and innovation.
Okay, so it's not an impossible dream.
Not at all. Lots of countries have made similar transformations using culture as a catalyst.
For economic growth, social progress, international recognition, all of that.
Right, all of that.
But it does take more than just, appointing a filmmaker to a council to make that happen.
Of course.
You need a genuine commitment, right, to supporting the arts, fostering creativity, protecting freedom of expression.
So it's a key.
It requires long-term vision, investment, a real dedication to nurturing talent. That takes time, effort, resources.
It does. But if they're serious about this dynamic approach, investing in culture, that could be a real game changer.
It could. It could help create a more inclusive society, attract tourism, bring in investment, build stronger relationships with other countries.
Exactly.
It's a bold move.
Oh, yeah.
And it's definitely something to watch. Will they be able to pull it off? It remains to be seen.
Huh.
But it has the potential to completely change how Bangladesh is seen, both by its own people and by the rest of the world.
Definitely something to keep an eye on.
So as we kind of shift gears here, I want to talk about the broader implications of these appointments. What are the potential consequences, both within Bangladesh and internationally?
All right. Well, domestically, I think one of the most important things to watch is how these appointments might influence the government's approach to social and economic issues.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. What kind of policy changes could we see? Who might benefit? Who might lose out?
So let's start with the economic side. If Udin's influence is strong, we might see policies that really prioritize economic growth above all else. Things like deregulation, cutting taxes for businesses, trying to attract more foreign investment.
Okay, but while that could lead to economic expansion, it could also make existing inequalities even worse.
Exactly. It's not just about how much the economy grows, it's about how that growth is distributed. Does everyone benefit? Or does the gap between the rich and the poor widen?
A very important point.
Well, now, on the social side, with Alam on the council, We could see a bigger focus on social welfare programs, initiatives to reduce poverty, maybe education reform.
Right. Those are all things that Professor Yunus has been advocating for.
They are.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be surprising to see those ideas reflected in what the government does.
It's almost like we're seeing two different ideologies here, one that's focused on economic liberalism, the other on social justice.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And finding that balance between those two visions, that's going to be a tough job.
A delicate balancing act, for sure.
Yeah. The choices they make, they're going to have a huge impact on millions of people in Bangladesh.
And those choices are going to be closely watched by other countries, too, especially in the region. What kind of message do you think these appointments send?
It tells the world that Bangladesh is in transition. It's a country trying to find its place in a world that's changing all the time. And these appointments, they could be an attempt to connect with a wider range of actors, both domestically and internationally.
So they're trying to project this image of being open for business, but also committed to social progress, to developing their culture.
Right, exactly. Trying to come across as dynamic, as adaptable. But ultimately, it's about more than just image, right?
Right.
They have to translate all of this into action, into results.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What happens in Bangladesh doesn't stay in Bangladesh.
Not at all.
It can affect the whole region, even have global implications.
It's true. It's a good reminder that we're all part of this larger system, and what one country does can create opportunities or challenges for others.
I keep thinking about Mustafa Sarwar Farooqi, the filmmaker, being appointed to the council. That move, it's really captured my imagination. It's almost symbolic, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like they're saying, hey, we value creativity. We value expression.
It is a statement for sure, and I think it goes beyond just symbolism, too.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. Culture has a huge influence on how a country is perceived, both by its own people and by the rest of the world.
Right.
So bringing Farooqi in, it could be a sign that they want to leverage that power to shape the narrative around Bangladesh, project a certain image.
Okay, yeah. It makes me think about the potential for cultural diplomacy here.
Oh, interesting.
Could he use this position to promote Bangladeshi art, film, literature, all of that on a bigger stage?
He could.
Could he build connections with artists, with cultural institutions around the world?
It's definitely possible. And, it fits with this idea of soft power that we talked about earlier.
Right. Using culture to achieve diplomatic goals.
Exactly. And we've seen other countries do this very successfully, using it to boost their global standing, build relationships.
Makes you wonder if Bangladesh is looking to do something similar.
It's possible.
Move beyond traditional diplomacy and engage with the world through art, through culture.
Yeah, it's a strategy that could really pay off for them. I mean, imagine if Bangladesh becomes known not just for its economic progress, which is important, but also for its vibrant arts scene, its literary tradition, its unique culture.
That would be pretty remarkable, wouldn't it?
It would. To go from being seen as primarily a developing nation to being recognized as a cultural powerhouse, a center for creativity, for innovation.
So it's not an impossible dream.
No, not at all. We've seen it happen before. Lots of countries have gone through similar transformations, and culture has played a key role.
But it does take more than just appointing a filmmaker to a council to make that happen.
Right. It takes a real commitment.
To supporting the arts, to fostering creativity, to protecting freedom of expression.
That's crucial. It has to be a long-term thing, too. You need to invest in the infrastructure, nurture that talent. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes resources.
But if they're serious about this dynamic approach, if they really want to shake things up,
right,
then investing in culture, well, that could have a huge impact.
It could be a game changer. It could help them build a more inclusive society, attract tourism, bring in investment, strengthen those relationships with other countries.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into what's happening in Bangladesh, what's the key takeaway here? What do you want our listeners to walk away with?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that we're seeing a moment of transition in Bangladesh. It's a time of uncertainty, but it's also a time of opportunity. These new appointments, they're not just about personalities, they represent different visions for the future of the country.
We've been given a peek behind the curtain, right?
Yeah.
We can see how things work, understand the forces that are shaping Bangladesh's destiny.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that politics is never static. It's always changing, evolving, adapting.
So for anyone listening who's interested in Bangladesh, in South Asia, or just in understanding the world today, this is a story to follow closely.
Definitely. The decisions that get made in the next few months, the next few years, they're going to have a big impact, not just on Bangladesh, but on the whole region, maybe even beyond that.
And who knows, maybe we'll come back to this story on a future deep dive, see how things have played out. But until then, keep thinking critically. Keep exploring the world with that curious mind.
I like it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.